everyone. Thank you all for joining and welcome, welcome, welcome. Tonight is our every other Wednesday literary nights with Unsolicited Press. Before we start, I want to remind you all to hit the like button and also to subscribe so that you will know when our next readings will take place. Tonight, we're having two authors join us. It's going to be Ann Lee Parrish and David Rosenheim, who are going to share their work. We may possibly have another writer joining us later in the show, and if and when that person comes in, that will be Bo Bernstein. Anyway, Anne Parrish is an award-winning writer with many books with her byline, and David Rosenheim is a poet. He'll be reading some of his poetry this evening, and his debut book of poetry is forthcoming at Unsolicited Press. So, welcome, David and Anne, and thank you both for being here tonight.
Hi.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, so I think we usually go in alphabetical order. So I think we'll start with Anne, and then we'll go to David, and we'll hear your wonderful work. And then after that, we will have a discussion about your work. So, Anne, would you like to begin?
I will begin. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. I'm noticing that my microphone is kind of like sliding down the side of my head, but if you can hear me, I'm not going to fuss with it. I'm coming through loud and clear.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to read this evening from my forthcoming novel. This is called The Hedgerow. It's coming out in July of this year. So a little over 3 months, July 9th, 2024. This is a sequel to a book that published in 2022, also Unsolicited Press, called An Open Door. So this has the same character, my protagonist, Edith Sloan. This is a work of historical fiction. I do need to emphasize that. If you didn't know that, it's going to sound a little odd, the passage that I'm reading. This is set in 1949. It's set in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My protagonist is a young woman who owns a bookstore on Harvard Square, and she's trying to get into poetry publishing. Not as an author, she wants to run a press that she has decided to name the Hedgerow Press. So in the short scene that I'm going to read to you, she is meeting with the first author she has agreed to publish, another woman named Laura Brown. And Edith was all excited about her manuscript and, she wants to publish it. Her fiance, a guy named Henry, was less enthusiastic, a little reluctant. You'll find out why they had a disagreement about it anyway. So Edith is going to meet Laura Brown in a bar, in Cambridge, in Boston, to talk about, how this is all going to go. And this is the first time they're meeting, and it's very exciting. Okay. Miss Brown was a refreshing change from Mr. Fitzhugh, but not what Edith had expected. She wore slacks, a button-down shirt, and not a speck of makeup. Of course, Edith had met lesbians before, or those she suspected were lesbians. There was a girl in one of her college classes, another in the map-making office, and a typist in another department at the UN. They didn't make her uncomfortable, just curious. Even the way Miss Brown held her cigarette between her thumb and forefinger was mannish. Do these things come naturally to her, or were they a signal to show that she preferred women? When they shook hands, Miss Brown's grip was strong, almost overpowering. She'd taken the liberty of ordering 2 dry martinis since she'd arrived a bit early. She leaned in and told Edith in a quiet voice that the bartender had been keeping his eye on her, and not in a flattering way. "Ever the Puritan town," Miss Brown said. "I haven't found it so." "Well, you wouldn't, would you?" Edith said she'd enjoyed her poetry and was excited to be bringing it out. Had she been writing long? "Years. It comes easily now, but it didn't, not for a long time," Miss Brown said. "And what do you do otherwise?" "Nothing at the moment. I majored in English and wanted to write for a newspaper, but they wanted me to review cookbooks and talk up garden clubs, and I just couldn't see myself doing that." "It does sound pretty dull." "I worked in a bank for a while, lived on a shoestring, saved up a bundle, and now just write, mostly in the evenings. I'm something of a night owl." "Well, your work is wonderful." "There were plenty of bad poems, believe me, and lots of people telling me I was wasting my time," Miss Brown said. I'm glad you ignored them. I adore your manuscript. My fiance did too, by the way, but not as much as I did. He's my co editor. I don't believe I mentioned that. I thought you were already married. Your letter said Mrs. Edith Sloane on the return envelope. I'm divorced. I see, and already engaged. You work fast. There was nothing offensive in the way she said this. Edith said her fiance was the one who worked fast, at least where she was concerned. He didn't hurry in other matters except when it was time to freshen his drink. Miss Brown listened politely, but Edith could see a gleam of whimsy in her eyes. I'm afraid I might be one of those women who can't imagine themselves being single, Edith said. But you were single once. Of course. Was it so bad? Not at all. I didn't think about it. It's just that my family thought I should get married. Mine thinks I should too. The chairs were comfortable, the light was pleasant in the room, the martini was delicious. It was lovely to relax and let her thoughts drift. Had she been wrong to speak about Henry like that to a stranger? Miss Brown didn't seem to mind. She seemed to think the whole thing funny. Edith returned to the matter at hand. She wanted Miss Brown to understand that the print run on her book would be small, only 50 copies. They would be sold through the Turned Page. That's Edith's store. Edith would contact other bookstores in the area and see if they could be persuaded to carry it too. And Miss Brown should count on coming in to read. She thought the store could accommodate up to 20 or 30 people comfortably. Of course, she'd have to round up some chairs. She'd look into that. I must say I admire your bravery, Miss Brown said, and signaled the waiter for another round. It's not so brave to publish a woman. If more people did, it wouldn't be seen as so unusual. That's not quite what I meant. What then? Miss Brown waited for the waiter to clear their glasses and put down fresh drinks. She scooped a handful of salted peanuts from the bowl on the table and fed them to herself, one by one, slowly, as if she had all the time in the world. Edith grew irritated with her. Miss Brown said Edith must have noticed how often she wrote about flowers and the parts of flowers and how she likened those parts to human parts or endowed them with human qualities. Yes, of course, I found it all so lovely. You gave something that has been so frequently written about a kind of romantic flavor normally reserved for human beings. I wonder if you'd think about a new title, though. You, forever, doesn't quite summon the ethos of the work. I was thinking something like a silent passion because you summon so well the feeling of things that go unexpressed. And I understand I do because it's so typical and expected that women love flowers. So we've all learned to keep quiet about it because otherwise we look silly. Miss Brown continued to eat her peanuts until she finished. Then she wiped her hands on one pants leg. On the level? She asked. Of course. The flowers aren't just flowers. They're women. Well, one woman in particular. Do you understand my meaning? Miss Brown asked. Edith did, but hadn't until that moment. No wonder Henry had objected to the manuscript. Read a certain way, it was sexually explicit. Why hadn't she seen that for herself? She'd been too swept away by the idea of publishing it that she hadn't read it closely enough. The subject matter would cause no end of trouble unless she were clever and resolute. That said, the imagery was stunning and the language was first rate despite the subtext. Miss Brown was watching her closely in a way that made Edith feel close to panic. Of course, and I think people like you need a voice. I'd like to give you that voice if you still agree, she said. I do. Edith complimented her on her subtlety. Some people might not see what she was driving at, and that would be helpful if there were objections down the road. We'll just accuse them of having a dirty mind, Miss Brown said. Exactly. Miss Brown asked if she'd excuse her for a moment so she could go powder her nose. Isn't that the silliest expression? I don't know why we can't just say we need to use the washroom, she said and stood up. Edith watched her go. She felt like a fool. It was too late to back out now. She had to go forward and make the best of it. When Miss Brown returned, she said she hoped Edith wasn't having second thoughts about her book. No, of course not. Just let me edit it a bit more, and then you can look over my suggestions. You don't have to accept any changes that you don't want to. I'm just happy I'm going to be in print. But I'm not sure giving a reading is such a great idea, if you know what I mean. Cambridge is a liberal place, not as liberal as you'd think. I know a couple of guys who got arrested last year. Oh? For what? What do you think? I see. Yes, of course. But for women, isn't it different? We tend not to carry on in public restrooms if that's what you mean. So the police aren't as likely to discover us doing what we shouldn't or what they think we shouldn't. But there are bars we like to visit where we feel safe. They show up sometimes. They're not exactly polite when they do. I imagine not. Miss Brown asked Edith her thoughts about the design of the book's dust jacket. Oh, I'm afraid I haven't given it any thought at all. I need to get up to speed, Edith said. Do you have a designer? I don't. Oh, well, I have a friend who's good at that sort of thing. One of my sales clerks is an art student. I'll ask her. Edith suggested Miss Brown jot down some ideas about imagery she felt would be appropriate as a guide for Jocelyn, her clerk, if she agreed. The waiter presented their bill, and Edith said she'd get it. Miss Brown didn't object. They walked out together, and Edith said she'd be in touch. Thank you for meeting with me and for everything. You don't know how long I've been trying to get published, Miss Brown said, then trotted across the street to catch her bus. Edith walked home, framing what she'd tell Henry. She wouldn't tell him about her meeting with Miss Brown. Instead, she'd tell him about Mr. Fitzhugh coming to the store and her offering him titles by women authors. He'd enjoy that. She was sure he would. And that's all.
Wonderful. Okay, now we're going to hear a reading from David, who's up next. We're going to hear some poetry, and then we're going to talk about it.
Great. Thank you, Rosalia. And thank you, Anne. That was great. Really drew me right in. Okay, so I'm David Rosenheim, and I'm going to read a few poems from my forthcoming book, which is called Owl, and it's coming out on Unsolicited Press in August. The first section of the book are poems written about and in different places of the world. A few years back, my family took a sort of a sabbatical year and did some traveling. And so the first couple poems are from that, and the subsequent poems sort of come home and are a little bit more internal in their subject matter. So the first is called Vernazza. You write the same scene over and over again, but cannot get it right. Memory demurs as you examine it. The tart burst of apricots as you eat them one after one from a blue enamel bowl. Figs too, their tiny seeds popping between teeth. 3 round tolls of a distant church bell. All of this under a lemon tree hung with fruit so heavy and bright, they remind you of lanterns. And the placid sea, yawning toward the horizon. Beyond the terracotta rooftops of the village, water so blue that the thought of it still makes you soft with longing. All the skiffs are in.
Nice.
The fishermen ensconced in cool rooms dreaming. The afternoon air so warm and thick, even the bees have quit the lavender. Her shoulder tan and sculpted, you kiss it and then her neck. The taste of salt and the faint smell of sun cream overwhelm you still. You retrace these images again and again, but cannot be certain it was Vernazza at all. The sea or a mountain lake, a blue bowl or green. You will never get it right. You cannot raise that ephemeral bloom. Only the pining, the grasping remains. You hope someday to forget all of this. This next one is called Milos. I put my wife and boys on a boat off a southern beach. My stomach is no good on boats. The wind was down, the sea flat and green. Later, the wind rose. A single bell tolled from the Byzantine tower. Cicadas sawed from a bent eucalyptus in the church square. But I don't believe in omens. Tonight, after my family have rinsed the salt and sunblock from their skin, we will get our last dinner on Milos. Wine, olives, scorpion fish. Who knows what change will have come. The next one is called I Am Odysseus in My Bed. In one dream, chased by wet black dogs running down steep ravines, barbed wire crossings. It's early, she says, sipping hot lemon water. Can we talk about James? But I am in ravines, cutting my way to the sea. The gorge is steep and dark, falling to places unknown. I am Odysseus in my bed when the northerly blows up a swell. Our house, a ship cast in mist and foam, salt licking at the door. I am nobody to those who would speak my name, nobody to the chorus. I am nobody and I am free. The old family clock awakens after a century or more, hands spinning back past the births of my sons, my marriage, my punk rock days, my fat boy pain, back, past the narrow straits of my own birth. The dogs lick their paws now, resting by the crackling fire, their oiled fur and curled teeth glistening in the glow. The clock slows its backward wind, stopping in the boat that brought it here. Black coal smoke streaking across the Atlantic, smudging the harbor sky where soot-winged gulls relay their kill, calling their code across time. This one is called Unincorporated. Unincorporated. Barnum, unincorporated. Shoulders a bend in Route 171, backed by steep hills, crowded with chokecherry, blue ash, jack pine. A thorny, buzzing prairie stretches opposite the road to the mud bank brown river. Almost a town, one general store abandoned, windows and corners swathed in web, jars and cans, US 1-gallon jugs entombed in silt. Ancient notices, yellow, brittle, litter the floorboards. Sloping junk in the yards, one by the road, white, pallid, luminous, shifts in shadow of the hill's lee. A girl in the upstairs window, rocking, mouthless, the sky xanthic, darkens. Flocks of blackbirds rise like darts from the scrub, wheeling across the wan sun. Her eyes wide, fixed, imploring, collide indelibly with mine as I ride east. This next one is called Camper Van. You open the side window, and birdsong floods the van. There is a pause in the rain. You take our son to pick tart berries, staining your teeth. Staining your teeth, ferns along the river unfurl around your ankles. Earlier, you climbed to the lip of an old blue glacier, the last of its kind, melting like candle wax into the southern sea. Your yellow poncho, a flag in the storm. Ice calves and waterfalls fed the foment as you disappeared beyond a rise. I boiled ramen for the boys on the camper stove, our long johns wet and stuck to cold chicken skin. The van windows gathering steam, we wiped away, scanning the horizon for your return.
Beautiful.
And I'll read one more. And this is called Leaving. You slept in the lee of a saguaro, the dawn when a plane nosedived into the desert floor, waking you with tequila eyes to the twin red balls of the flaming metal cocoon and the actual sunrise. You, rising on stiff knees, unsure which was your fault, implicating yourself in the drama as usual, as streams of birds flew like arrows, or souls you thought from the scene, leaving you thought everyone is always leaving.
Beautiful. Such lovely poetry and such wonderful story. So now let's talk about the stories and the poems. First of all, I did not read the previous book of your forthcoming book, Anne. But what inspired this series? Is it a series, a trilogy? Can you talk a little bit about the work?
Definitely. I'm not sure it's a series. The first book, An Open Door, is Edith in an earlier incarnation where she is still married to a man she ultimately divorced. She's a graduate student. They're both graduate students after World War II at Harvard. He's in law school. She's studying American poetry. And he, at one point, tells her, I don't want you getting a doctorate. I need you to support me in my career. Remember, this is the era when women were told your husband's career comes first. I based this on the lives of my own parents who, after the Second World War, went to graduate school at Harvard. My father was not in law school. He was in graduate school. They both were in different departments. He did not tell my mother, you can't continue with your academic training. She did go on eventually to get her doctorate, but she was not happy in her marriage. Edith is not happy in her marriage. And my mother basically ran away from my father for an entire summer. She went to New York City, lived with an aunt, and worked as a secretary in the newly established United Nations. It was 1948. And she worked as a secretary for the French ambassador. So I took that event and I made a whole story out of it. She runs away. In the novel, Edith goes back to Walter, her husband, but things do not work out. So I wanted to keep going with her, and she acquires this bookstore and she's going to publish poetry. And the reason I'm obsessed with this era, this is a time when abortion was illegal. It's a time when husbands told their wives what to do. This is my cautionary tale. This is where the Republicans want us to return to. And I don't think women are going to go back to 1950 willingly and quietly. But, and so I'm hoping that if people do read my book, they'll say, my goodness, things were just very, very restricted then for when, yeah, they were very restricted then. So that was the point.
All right, and David, I could tell that some of your poetry, which relies very much on bucolic and nature imagery, some of it was set in Europe. So tell us the inspiration or germination for this volume of poetry with its travel, because many people travel, they write a travel log, they don't actually turn it into art.
Poems, yeah.
Well, thanks. I guess I have, I am a nature, I'm a tree hugger. And, some of the poems, let's see. Yeah, well, unincorporated in a whole section of the book are written in and about, or taking imagery from this little corner of southwestern Wisconsin where my family has a farm and where I spent a lot of my childhood and still return to today. And it's just lush, very, very rural. And that was where I really established, I guess, my connection with nature. I feel lost writing if I'm not really specific with imagery, and so maybe it's a crutch or just kind of the place that I go. But when I'm traveling, when I'm or just writing here in my little tiny backyard in Pacifica, California, I need to be grounded in really the specifics of the place. And to me, if I'm doing that, then it starts to reveal something else. and sometimes it'll give me a turn or an insight that I wasn't looking for.
Yeah, there were many, many images in your poetry that did exactly that. Some are very arresting, like the bee that quit, that quit the lavender.
Well,
Uh, that really, that really stuck out to me. It was so hot that the bee didn't even want to work. And bees are known to be worker bees.
Mhm.
So, but also, how did you read all from just the first part, or did you read poems from the beginning travel part and the end part? Like, how did you
I skipped around a little bit.
how did the arc go from
I mean,
traveling to back home?
oh yeah. Well, it's interesting. How do you sequence a book of poems? I actually worked with somebody, with an editor, to help me do that,
Hmm.
and she helped me see sort of themes that maybe I wasn't seeing. To be, if I'm being perfectly honest, um, you know, and as far as what I read tonight, I just kind of picked some out. I think there are some that I'm used to reading. I wanted to try some out tonight that I'm not used to reading. Um, Yeah, but as far as the arc that this editor came up with, her name is Ma. Um, yeah, it starts with the external, with the world and these places that we went to. We were really fortunate to go to, I think, 14 countries across many continents, and so there's there are poems from many of those. And then, as I said, when I queued it up, it kind of turns a little bit more inward, towards
Mm-hmm.
just the family and some relationships. There's scenes from Wisconsin, and then the last section of the book is really about coming and going. I
Hmm.
have many people, I think, have this experience, but I grew up in the Midwest, but I've lived my adult life in California, and I had this experience of coming and going, and traveling for work when my kids were little. And there's a lot of sadness to that, of just that transience that is
Hmm.
obvious when you're traveling, coming and going, but it's also just part of being human.
Hmm. But I also think it's part of the American human condition, because unlike some of those countries that you may have visited, which might have
Mhm.
been smaller than our entire, I mean, except for Australia and other parts of Asia, like the Indian subcontinent, those European countries are really small. So many, and even countries in South America are relatively easily accessible within a couple of days of travel, whereas in the United States we're coming and going, but we're not really going anywhere except for our own country.
Mhm.
So I was wondering about the arc, and the detailed imagery is just really wonderful.
Thanks.
And back to Anne, you picked a couple of topics that are really, I want to say, touchstones in our history. Touching on the, like, now abortion issues and women's rights are at risk. Well, they are already being
definitely.
eroded. Yeah, and also LGBT rights are also being eroded. So, how conscious of a decision was it to, um, have your first poet that Edith wants to publish is a gay woman? I think it's pretty hilarious that she didn't see the Georgia O'Keeffe elements of the poems, which I thought
Yeah,
was
she
pretty.
didn't. Edith is a very intelligent young woman, but she's very much in her own head, and she just it didn't quite connect that this was going on. I thought she made a good recovery. Yeah, for me, it's important. I mean, what was it like to be gay in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1949? My goodness, talk about a restrictive and repressive atmosphere. I should mention that her owning a bookstore, that again is from family history. When my mother was a graduate student, she and another, they were called faculty wives, bought this bookstore called the Mandrake Bookstore on Harvard Square, that they owned for a couple of years. And I remember my mother talking about working in the store, and she said every now and then, on a rotating basis, they would never tell you beforehand, censors would come into the store and ask you, are you carrying banned books? 1984 by
Wow.
George L. Orwell was a banned book. And and she said they, when they came, they would just put the books under the counter. They'd say, oh no, we don't carry that title. And then they'd go on their way. That's what the world was, and it was against the law. To be against the law, you could be arrested for being a homosexual. So I wanted to get this in front of people and say, pay attention. Pay attention to what some people would have us do again. And to kind of write about, my parents at Harvard. They're long gone now, but it was an important time in their lives. So yeah, the politics is important to me.
Yes. And I'm a little confused now. When she refers to her fiance, is that the man she married, or is that someone
She
a
doesn't
new
marry him.
boyfriend?
No. Henry was someone that had been friends with her husband. Henry was another graduate student. He's British. He's a British peer. He's an earl. He's got all this money, and he came to Harvard presumably to study Shakespeare. And everybody's like, "Wait a minute! Don't you have good universities over there? Why are you here?" That's a long backstory. But he falls in love with Edith, and when her marriage to Walter falls apart, he says, "Come and move into my apartment." This is another thing. This is 1949, and this is a man and a woman living together, and they are not married. And there's a scene in the beginning of The Hedgerow where the neighbor down the hallway, a 60-year-old woman, she threatens to call the police because they are living in sin. This is what happened. And later, after Laura Brown gives her reading, a little bit of a spoiler alert, a detective shows up at the store and says, somebody filed a complaint about salacious material being read. And Edith just plays dumb and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. These are beautiful poems about flowers. How can you say that? But it was against the law to write it, but to have this stuff presented in public, to have obscenity. He said, I could arrest you on an obscenity charge. So
Meanwhile, the Boston marriage. Are you familiar with the Boston marriage?
yes, I am.
Yeah, I mean that was New England, so
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. A lot of
So
contradictions.
yeah. So let's talk about writing process. David, how do you write? Are you disciplined and write every day at a certain time at a certain hour for a certain length of time, or do are you more loosey goosey about it? And Anne, I want to ask you the same question too. So whoever answers first, and also like what does your writing process look like?
I can jump in. I'm pretty structured, and also can be a little bit flexible. When I'm writing fiction, I have to write, you know, put pages under my belt every day, and that's something I learned after meandering for quite a while. I'm not currently writing fiction, but when I am, it has to have a daily cadence. My writing process is kind of geeky. My commitment to myself is that I write at least a poem a week, and I usually do that like on a Saturday. And I'm also revising a few poems a week. And the reason that the math isn't the same is that I have a huge backlog of poems that I need to. So I'm usually like, I'll write it and I'll let it sit for a year or two or 3 or 4, and then I'll dig up that notebook and I'll revise that notebook over the course of a couple months.
So you write by hand then in a notebook?
I write by hand. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I use a computer. I had written by hand forever, and I kind of wish I still did. I might go back to that. I also try to write something substantive every single day. Today, for example, I was not particularly inspired, so I decided to use my office time to submit some short stories and some poems, both. I say to myself, okay, if you're not generating stuff, you can at least get some stuff out there. I do a lot of round robin because I've got several projects all the time. I've got books coming out, and they're all in different phases of development. So I'll be proofreading or editing or creating something new. So that keeps me going. But as I say, there are just times when it all just kind of comes to a grinding, soft landing, and I don't feel like doing anything, and I end up doing a lot of online shopping. But
Mhm.
I try to,
I think
I
we've
try
all
to,
been there.
yeah. But I try to get, I want to produce. I've got a lot of stuff that I've committed with Summer to bring out, our renowned publisher. So I have to stay at it.
Mm.
So,
So
Well, one
go
one
ahead,
thing
David.
that I was just going to say one thing that I do outside of my like normal structured stuff is I really, and especially since I'm not traveling in the way that I was a few years ago, I love writing ekphrastic poetry. In looking at art
mhm.
and writing, and
Mhm.
I try to get. This is a way to give myself also to make my work, my day job. I'm an executive coach. To make that more sustainable is that once a month I try to go to a museum
Mm,
and just write in response to what
that
the
cool.
visual art that I'm seeing, and
That's
that's really
cool.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Baltimore Museum of Art has a program for poets that does exactly that, where
Mm,
they invite them into the museum. It's more structured and not loosey goosey. So they sort of talk about the paintings and what's in them, and like they talk about all this art stuff related to the paintings, and then they sort of send the poets off to do. And some fiction writers have been joining that because they've been creating stories based on the artwork that they see. So that's really a very good way to be inspired or to stay inspired.
Totally.
So, how long a day? How long? What is your length of writing time per day? David and Ann both. Like, are you do you write 8 hours a day? Are you writing 4 hours? Like, how does it work for you?
A good day for me, I could do 4 hours, but I'm not, as I say, I'm not like writing the whole time. I'll be
Mhm.
editing or reading, reviewing it constantly. I volunteer myself to writers I know, and I read their stuff quite often, and I'm making comments on that. So there's that keeps me going too.
mm.
4 or 5 hours, but it's not like back to back writing. I know there's a lot of online game solitaire I play, and then I get back. Another game is solitaire. Oh, I won that one, and I'll get back. But I wrap up for the day around 3 o'clock, 3:30, and I
And
get in here.
And
I get in here about 7 to 7:30. So
okay. And
is
what
what
about
is
you,
writing
David?
your well, I was just going to ask Anne, is writing your sounds like it's your full-time
yeah, it
thing.
is. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't. I don't have that much time because I have a full-time job.
Yeah, exactly.
But when I was writing my novel, it was, and I had a very intense full-time job. I was getting up every morning and writing for a half hour, and I found that I could actually,
You can
you
get a
know,
lot done in a half an hour.
yeah, if you're focused on it. These days I have an hour, or depending on the day, an hour or an hour and a half in the afternoon blocked out for writing activities. That might be, as you were saying, like submissions,
Mhm.
it might be revisions, it might be writing.
Yeah,
And I get to that, I would say, 3 days a week.
that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very good. So we
Hmm.
have a little bit of time left. Do you want to read a little bit more of your work? Maybe David, you could read another poem, and Anne, you could read another little maybe
I'll
a
look.
couple more. So
Yeah, let me find something here. I'm just going to read a short one. I was
okay,
talking about the theme of coming and going,
okay.
and this one is called Going. Going. Open window. Still, humid night. Late train rumbles northbound from Chicago. Everything is easy here. Fridge stocked with fresh OJ, whitefish salad, expired condiments. Wednesday. Time to go back to certain fog, Pacifica, California. Every damn time, I leave as if the first. Dad weeping silently, Super 8, Canton, New York.
Nice. And Anne, are you ready? Just a little short little
Oh, I
segment.
don't know where the heck I had this whole section I was going to read before, and now I can't find it.
It's okay. Just read whatever you.
Okay, I'm going to just read from the beginning of it. How about that? Chapter 1.
Okay, that'll be fine.
Okay. Edith didn't have to read the return address to know the letter was from Walter. They'd been coming all summer, always on a Wednesday. The first paragraph would be about his law job and the cases he was assigned. The second paragraph would talk about his parents or his sister Kathleen and the wild things she and her new husband were up to. Sometimes he wrote about someone he had lunch with or a problem with his apartment the landlord was neglecting to address. The third would touch on current affairs, now all about the Koreans and the trouble they were stirring up. He'd close with all best, as if they never married, never cared for each other, and never made a single plan together. Sometimes, when her heart softened, she thought he might sense how she'd fallen apart after moving out of their apartment. He could be trying to bolster her spirit with a cheery, neutral tone, as if to say, I understand. You'll be fine. I'm fine too. But usually, she thought not. Do you need more?
No, beautiful.
Thank you.
So I'd like to let all of our listeners and uh, viewers know that all of these books, David's book and Anne's book, are available on Unsolicited Press's website, and it's www.unsolicitedpress.com, and go into the books and poetry sections, and you'll be able to find them. I also want to alert everyone that the next reading that we will have is April 17th, and once again, it's going to be 5:30 p.m. Pacific time and 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. So I hope you'll be able to join us for those two readings for this next month's the next week's reading for this month. And other than that, I hope that everyone enjoyed these stories. I feel very inspired every time we have a literary nights with Unsolicited Press reading, because I think of all the things that I want to accomplish with my own work, and also the characters and the exquisite imagery is also very inspiring. So thank you, David and Ann Lee, for joining us this
Thank
evening.
you.
And we're going to say good night, and we hope that if you came in late, that you'll be able to scroll back and watch us again, and join in again on April 17th. So good night, everybody, and thank you for
Night.
joining. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Night.